Thank you, Adnan. We're now going to have a series of rebuttals. We'll have a first rebuttal of 10 minutes each, and then a second rebuttal of 5 minutes. So I'll invite Sam up to have his first rebuttal.
Okay, well, thank you, Adnan. Great to be speaking with you again. I'll go through the points that you raised. Your first point was the Muslim view of the Bible, and in one sense, I think that has a lot to do with this. I'll just go back to where I was. Probably should have gone there beforehand. When the Quran makes claims about the Bible, it is very common for Muslims to say, if the claim doesn't seem to be working out, but the Bible's been changed. And it's just what we hear as Christians all the time. You know, the Quran claims something, we look at it, it doesn't seem to be true. The Bible's been changed. And really, in many ways, that's what's... sorry, I've lost my place here. This is one of the issues that we have to deal with, in that it's very common for there to be three responses to Muhammad not being found in the Bible. The first is to say, well, the Bible's been changed and it's not reliable, and that's why he's sort of not there as clear as you might think. The second is to say, is to attempt to do it, and that's what a lot of books do. But the third one is actually the Gospel of Barnabas and the Gospel according to Islam, where Muslim leaders have actually rewritten the Gospel to make it foretell the coming of Muhammad. And so this sort of dismissing of the Bible is a common thing that we have to, that Christians have to face. And I guess I just want to say, I don't think it helps our dialogue that whenever we say something from the Bible, you say, well, it's been changed. When I've read the Quran, it actually says that each community has its own book and it's to judge by its own book, that Christians have the gospel that Jesus had. It actually says that explicitly. There's to be no distinction made between any of the holy books. God's word cannot be changed. Jews and Christians are to read their books. Even Mohammedan Muslims can read the books. And as we've seen, Muhammad is foretold in there. And so this is one of the things as Christians, that when we're having dialogue, the Bible's often attacked as a way of just excusing why the evidence for Islam's not there. You mentioned the Apostle Paul being a false prophet. I just want to point out, as I showed on my diagram, that Christians don't just read Paul. Christians actually read all of the prophets. And this is what's different between Christianity and Islam. Let me just get it here. Where are you? There we go. The Bible's not just the Apostle Paul. The Bible has the law of Moses. It has the books of the prophets. It has the Psalms of David, the books of the gospel. Christians actually believe all the prophets, and we're the ones who read them. We don't have one man telling us what to believe about the other prophets. We actually read all the prophets ourselves, and that's what the Bible is. It's actually all of the prophets. Now, the idea that there's no prophecy in the Old Testament that Jesus is mentioned by name, there actually is. It's in Zechariah chapter 6, where at the return of the exile, a man named Yeshua, or Jesus, is given a symbolic event. It's Zechariah chapter 6, verse 11. And what happens is that the prophet comes up to this priest and he makes a crown, and he says to the priest, I'm going to put this crown on your head, Joshua, and you're going to be a priest who rules. And there's going to be a harmony between the priest and the king are going to come together. And it's Zechariah chapter 6, verse 11. And the man that happens to, his name is Jesus. His name is Jesus. And it says in Zechariah that he is a prophecy of what God is going to do in the future. So there actually is a prophecy for the priest king coming in the future called Jesus. You mentioned how Christians force interpretations of the Old Testament to make them foretell the coming of Jesus. My problem with you saying that is that Muslims are meant to believe that Jesus is the Messiah. And so the prophecies in the Old Testament, in the Torah and in the Jewish scriptures that are about Jesus, I thought you'd be with us in saying Jesus is the Messiah. They are about him. And so I'm not sure why you want to say that, looking at the Old Testament and that Christians are forcing an interpretation when you should be agreeing with us that Jesus is the Messiah. I'll move on to Ishmael. You mentioned that Ishmael was originally part of the covenant. I'll look at a couple of verses with this. The first is that the book of Genesis is clear that Ishmael, along with all of Abraham's children, is going to be blessed. So there's no doubt about that. But in verse 19, it says, God said, "No, your wife Sarah," so God's speaking to Abraham, "your wife Sarah will bear you a son, and you will name him Isaac. I will confirm my covenant with him as a permanent covenant for his future offspring. As for Ishmael, I have heard you. I will certainly bless him. I will make him fruitful and multiply him greatly. He will father tribal leaders, and I will make him into a great nation. But I will confirm my covenant with Isaac." And so we see there that the Bible is clear that the covenant just doesn't go to everyone, it goes to whom God chooses. And it doesn't go to Ishmael, it goes to Isaac. And we actually see this in the next generation, because when Isaac has children, he has two sons, Esau and Jacob. And even though Jacob is the firstborn, the covenant goes to Jacob. And it's God showing that he chooses and he is sovereign in who he chooses. And so we see this pattern elsewhere. It's not just with Ishmael, it's with others. You mentioned that the story of that what I've read here has been changed, and you were talking about the Jewish scholars after the exilic period were changing these scriptures. I want some evidence that it has actually been changed, not just from someone saying it has, but some textual evidence. And the evidence you gave was from chapter 21, where you're saying that the story doesn't make sense because Ishmael, who's a young man, is being carried by his mother. But that's not actually what she's carrying. She's carrying the water. If you go and read the story, so it's verse 14. Early in the morning, Abraham got up, took bread and a wineskin, put them on Hagar's shoulder and sent her away with the boy. He's not putting this boy on her shoulders, he's putting the food supplies on her shoulders, and then they're going off. So there's no evidence that the story has been changed. The story is consistent that it's God's sovereign choice who he chooses and who he establishes his covenant with. All right, now, just a side point. You're saying that Christians find nothing positive in Muhammad, nothing positive to say about him. Well, that's sort of not the discussion tonight. Tonight the discussion is he foretold in the Bible? I enjoy writing Arabic. I've been learning Arabic. I studied the verse for tonight in Arabic, and so I enjoy writing it and learning the language. I don't have any problem with it, but it's just not the topic of tonight. So, I see positive things in Islam, but that's just not the topic tonight. You also mentioned if Muhammad is such a great figure, then why isn't he mentioned in the Bible? Why isn't he mentioned? Well, all I can say is, and you're saying people say the Pope's in there and everything else. I'd say the Pope's not in there. That's just Christians being silly when they say the Pope's predicted in there. People try to foretell everything from the Bible because it gives them a justification. But if we're going to say why isn't Muhammad in there, why isn't the computer in there? Why isn't space travel in there? There's a lot of things we could say which are big and significant. And so it's not really a reason to say, well, he's not in there, so the Bible, he should be in there. Well, we can't tell God what he's going to put in. The Quran doesn't talk about space travel or computers either. So, it talks about a certain subject, and it's fine for it to talk about that subject. That's okay. Finally, when we were looking at Deuteronomy 33 and those three locations, I'll just finish up with this, where we were looking at Sinai, Seir and Paran. I just want to say again that verse is not talking about prophets. It's not talking about revelation. It's talking about the places that the Israelites went as they came out of Egypt and how God was with them. And so, if it said these people represent prophets, then sure, but it's just not saying that. So I don't think we can read that into it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Samuel. Adnan will now have 10 minutes for his first rebuttal.
Thank you, Samuel. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Thank you very much for that rebuttal. I'll quickly pick on a few points, and then will move on to my presentation. You said we don't accept Jesus and the prophecies about him in the Bible. I said we do. I don't think you heard me clearly. We do accept prophecies about Jesus Christ in the Old Testament when they talk about the Messiah. Definitely 100% we accept them, right? Likewise, we accept prophecies about Prophet Muhammad in the Old Testament when they do talk about him. When a prophet from Arabia is clearly foretold, it can't be anyone else. And if Muhammad was a false prophet, God forbid, then he was a very big false prophet. Very, very, very dangerous false prophet, right? Because he did so many great things. He did so many noble things. He fulfilled so many prophecies. And he made so many prophecies that came to pass. To prove him to be a false prophet is not an easy task. And this is why we are Muslims. We are not Muslims because we were born into Muslim families. Not myself, not me, right? We have studied. I have studied the biblical text for the last at least 15 years. So we do accept those prophecies. When it comes to textual evidence of the corruption of the Bible or the text of the Bible, Jeremiah 8:8, Prophet Jeremiah talks about it, that the scribes of the law have corrupted it. Their corrupting pen has corrupted the law. Now you can come back and explain to us as to what that means. And this is not, again, a discussion on the corruption of the Bible. I have had debates with Christian scholars on that point. With regards to covenant, I'm not going to indulge in that. Again, there are many passages in the Old Testament, in the book of Genesis and onwards, where the biblical text is simply not consistent. For example, one short example. Who is the sacrificed son according to the biblical text? He is supposed to be the firstborn or the only child of Abraham according to the text, right? But that was not true. When Isaac was born, Ishmael was already 13 years old. So Ishmael was the firstborn. So the sacrificed child could not be Isaac. Either Isaac was not the firstborn or he was not the sacrificed child. These are some inconsistencies in the text of the Bible with regards to covenant. Then you mentioned a few things about brethren, when it refers to I will raise you up a prophet from your brethren. You said it has to be Israelites. No, in the book of Deuteronomy chapter 23 verse 7, Edomites who are not Israelites are called the brethren of Israelites. By that virtue, the Ishmaelites are more of brethren for Israelites than Edomites are, right? So all I have to do is show you one example in the Bible where another people are referred to as the brethren of Israelites. My job is done. My case is, my mission is accomplished, to show you that the Ishmaelites, the Arabs, are the brethren of the Israelites. By that reasoning, this prophecy definitely refers to Prophet Muhammad. Right. So in 1818, we are told that there will be a prophet like Moses. God promised that a prophet like Moses will come, not from the Israelites necessarily, but from the brethren of the Israelites. And what is Moses like? Christians a lot of the time claim that this is Jesus. And now we will see why it cannot be Jesus, why it has to be Prophet Muhammad. We will see a Moses-like prophet. Moses and Muhammad both had parents and had natural birth. Jesus did not. Moses and Muhammad both married and had children. Jesus did not. Both were eventually accepted by their people, and their people followed them. Jesus did not have that privilege. Both governed in this world as rulers and established order. They applied the God-given law. Jesus did not. In fact, Jesus said, my kingdom is not of this world. When he was put in front of Pontius Pilate, he said, my kingdom is not of this world. When the adulteress was brought to him for adultery, although the passage is, according to many biblical scholars, is an interpolation, that particular story is an interpolation into the text of the Bible. It's a corruption, but because you believe in it, it's in your Bible, I will use it. Jesus refused to stone her. Why? Because he said in front of Pontius Pilate, my kingdom is not of this world. He was unlike Moses for that reason. Both were lawgivers and brought new laws. And this law was foretold in the book of Isaiah 42, which Samuel, for some reason amazingly, didn't even mention in his rebuttal or in his response to the Muslim claims. Isaiah 42 is the most powerful reference to Prophet Muhammad in the Bible. We will see why I say that. Both led migrations of their followers. Both migrated or emigrated. Both defeated the enemies. Both of them were triumphant against the enemies. Moses defeated Pharaoh. By the help of God, Prophet Muhammad was triumphant against his enemies. Within his life, his armies were already fighting the Romans. Both defeated the enemies. Both died of natural causes while in power and were buried, unlike Jesus. Both were humans, not God, unlike Jesus, as the Christians claim. Right? Christians claim Jesus is God. So how is he like Moses if he's God? Moses was not God. Even though Moses is the only human who is called God in a singular way, in a singular sense, in the entire text of the Bible. In the book of Exodus chapter 7 verse 1, God tells Moses that I have made you a God to Pharaoh with small g. Right? So if anyone should be God, according to the Bible, it should be Moses, not Jesus. Because Jesus is not called God by himself anywhere in the text of the Bible. Both became prophets at 40, unlike Jesus. Jesus was a prophet when he was born. We believe that. According to the Quran, we are told Jesus was a prophet of God in the cradle. He defended his mother from the cradle. So these are some very powerful points that need your consideration. So Jesus is nothing like Moses. In fact, Jesus never claimed to be like Moses. Jesus never claimed to be that prophet foretold in Deuteronomy 18:18. That prophet never came. If Muhammad is not a true prophet of God, that prophecy remains unfulfilled. John the Baptist refused to accept that he was that prophet. So did Jesus, because Jesus was the Christ. Self-confessedly, Jesus was the Christ. If he was the Christ, he could not be that prophet. Who is that prophet? Who is that prophet? Again, Deuteronomy 34:10 tells us, and there arose not a prophet since in Israel like unto Moses. And Samaritan Torah, if you read it, it says, there will never arise such a prophet in Israel. If not in Israel, then where is the question? In the brethren of the Israelites, the Arabs. So we go to Isaiah 42 now. Isaiah has some very interesting prophecies. The most powerful one, in my opinion, is Isaiah 42, which mentions some very specific points with regards to this person who is coming from Arabia. Why do I say that? These are some of the qualities mentioned in the entire chapter. When you read the chapter, and if you know the life of the Prophet of Islam, Prophet Muhammad, you will see him in this prophecy, no one else. Why? Because it specifically mentions his location. Specifically. It's not even vague. It is very specific with all the qualities he came with. He was the chosen one. We are told from his own biography that he was the chosen one of God. He was very gentle in his behavior. If we were to believe all the stories Samuel has been writing on Islam, answering Islam in his articles, because he uses a lot of inauthentic or unauthentic Islamic information to make a lot of his arguments. If he was to read the authentic stuff, he would come to realize that Prophet Muhammad was a very gentle man. He was a very gentle man. He brought judgment for the earth. His people governed from one corner of the earth to the other. His law, the Hebrew word there in the prophecy is the Torah. And this is a Torah after the Torah of Moses. And no Israelite prophet ever claimed to have brought another Torah. This is a new law, which this prophet king will bring. Christopher North is a biblical scholar specifically specializing in the book of Isaiah. In his commentary on this particular passage, in his book Suffering Servant in Deutero-Isaiah, Suffering Servant in Deutero-Isaiah, published by the Oxford University Press, he stated that this judgment is something like the Arab deen, or the Arabic religion, or Islam. This is what he said, Islam. He used the word Islam. So this new law came with no one else but Prophet Muhammad. It's a comprehensive law. Islam is a very comprehensive way of life. He will come as a light for Gentiles. He will put idol worshippers to shame. And he has something to do with Kedar, where the people of Kedar live. Kedar was the second son of Ishmael. According to the book of Genesis chapter 25 verse 13, Kedar was the second son of Ishmael, a direct ancestor of the Prophet of Islam, Prophet Muhammad, according to the biography of Prophet Muhammad himself. So Kedar was in Arabia. Prophet Muhammad was a direct descendant. This particular passage mentions the location directly, and it mentions the Mount Sela, which is in Medina. And he will triumph against his enemies, and he will be a messenger of God. All of these things put together, if they do not fit Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, then they do not fit anyone else in the history of humanity. Thank you very much for listening.